This video has been brought to you by Learn Flutter Code, the platform that upgrades your skills as a Flutter developer. At the end of this video, you will be able to create this Flutter Web app that syncs with the URL. So if I were to click, for example, on this enemy book, you could see that the URL over here has changed into book with the ID number 3. Secondly, it also saves the history. So if you were to go to the history tab, you could see that the URL has been saved inside the history of the web browser. And lastly, you are able to navigate through the URL. So if I were to go to manual to minimalism, and now if I were to click on this back button, you could see it goes back to the home page. And then if I were to go to the back button, it should go direct me to the enemy book cover page. Moreover, if I were to change the book number, for example, book number 1, it will actually help us go to the correct book review page. This video is the continuation of a previous video on how to refactor your default Navigator to the new Navigator 2.0. I would highly recommend you to watch the video first to prevent any confusion. Once you have done that, then you can download this project to follow along in the Navigator version 2 slugs branch. Don't forget to give it a star. So let's get started. So when should you use Navigator 2.0? So there is a couple of criteria that I think you need to meet if you want to really use Navigator 2.0. So the first one is that you have a Flutter Web app or Flutter app that is also a PWA that has a content component, which means you have a blog. So anything content based, then you might want to think to use Navigator 2.0. Second is that you want users to have a normal web experience. So what do I mean by that? Well, the first one is that you want the users to be able to use the forward and back button. If you don't want users to use these buttons or you don't care, then you don't have to go through the pain of Navigator 2.0. So secondly, you want to have web history enabled. So if a user were to read a lot of content, then you probably want some web history enabled inside your Flutter Web app. Third, you expect the users to change the URL of the website. So if you were to have a couple of blog posts or book reviews, then you want to have this feature on, because users might just want to see whether there's any other books according to the name or the ID. And then lastly, you want to show the URL of the different pages of the content that you have inside your website or Flutter Web app. So this will be shown to the users, and the users will be able to see the different URLs for the different pages. So if all of this criteria is something that you want, if you miss out any one of them, then just don't go through the pain. But if you have all of this ticked or all of these criteria, then I will highly recommend you to use Navigator 2.0 for your Flutter Web app. Otherwise, I would recommend you to use any JavaScript framework or even a website builder that helps you do this, and most website builder will do this for free for you. So Navigator 2.0, a little warning, is very complicated. So that's just my opinion. In the current Flutter Web project, it is able to show the different pages from the different books. However, if you were to type in a custom URL over here, for example, book/1, and you press enter, nothing happens. Therefore, it cannot update according to the URL that we set. In order for us to get the URL sync, we need to use the MaterialApp router. So what is this MaterialApp router? Well, it is another type of MaterialApp that uses the router for navigation instead of the Navigator object. So previously we used the Navigator object over here that stores the pages. Now we are going to use the router constructor. So the material router requires two things: the router delegate and the route information parser. So what are these two things and how do they work together? Well, here is a simplified example of how everything works. So if you were to type in the URL inside your web browser, for example, something.com book/1, then it will pass through the router information parser. And this router information parser will convert this URL into a data or a user-defined data. The data that we are going to create later is called this book route path, and it has a details data which represents the details page or the book page that we are going to show, and its ID will be number 1. Then this data that the router information parser has converted for us will be passed to the router delegate. Currently inside our book app, we are in our home page. And this router delegate is in charge of the state of the router app. And once the router delegate know that there is an update in the URL, it will consume the book route path data in the route delegate, and it will show the details page or the book page according to the data that it has consumed, which is the Fight Club book page. First, we need to create the data that is called the book route path, which is the name of the data that we are going to create. So let's go back to our IDE, and we are going to create a new file under our library folder. Let's call it the book_route_path.dart file. So inside our book route path.dart file, we're going to create a class, and then we're going to name it book route path. And inside this book route path, we are going to have two fields. So the first field is an integer that represents the ID of the book. The second is the boolean that is called isUnknown. So this boolean will represent whether we should show the 404 page. So there are three paths or routes that we are expecting. So the first one is home. So we can type in book route path.home, and then we will put this colon. So we're going to make use of this thing called the initializer list. Think of it as a named constructor, but much easier. So the first thing is that we're going to assign the ID to the value null. In the previous video, in order for us to be in the home page, our book has to be null. So in our previous video, inside our main.dart file, our home page will only be shown if our selected book is equal to null. If it's not equal to null, then the book page that we click on will be redirected. So let's go back to the book route path, and now we are going to assign the isUnknown into false, because the home is not an unknown page. It is something that we are going to go very often. Now the next thing is we're going to create the next path, the second path, so we can copy the book route path.home and then paste it over here. We are going to name it as details. So details represent the book page that we have over here. So this requires the ID. We're going to create an argument that passes in the ID. And then for the isUnknown, we can assign it to false as well. And lastly, we are going to create another path or route that is called unknown. So we have home and we have details. But sometimes a user will just randomly type in stuff, and this will be an unknown route. So we need to catch that as well. Let's name it as, you guessed it, unknown. So do you think an unknown has an ID? Well, there isn't. So we're going to set it as null. And then for the isUnknown, we're going to set it as true. Alright, so now we have the three paths: home, details, and unknown. At the same time, we're going to create two getter methods to show whether the book path is a home path or a details path. So we're going to type in bool get is home page, and then we're going to use the arrow, and then we're going to see whether the ID is equal to null. We are going to do the same thing for detail page. So what we can do is we can press alternate shift down arrow key, and then this will duplicate the line over here. Now we can change this is home page into the is details page, and this ID will not be null because we will require it over here. So that means the conditional will be ID is not equal to null. So what about the unknown page? Well, there is this boolean called is unknown. So if it is unknown, then it will be true. If you see this example over here, it's actually the example that I got off from the Learning Flutter's New Navigation and Routing System by John Ryan in this Medium article, because I needed this Medium article to really understand what the new Navigator is. So most of the content has been inspired by this Medium article. So let's get back to our IDE. So now we have the data that we're going to pass in our route information parser and our router delegate. The next thing is we're going to create the route information parser. So let's go to main.dart file. And then what we can do is let's go down all the way. And then we're going to create another class. And we're going to name it as book route information parser. So this will extend the route information parser over here. And we will have to put in the data type that we are passing, which is the book route path that we have over here. So we can go back to the book route path.dart file, copy the book route path name, and then we can paste it over here. Then we can import as such from our package file. Now this book route information parser, if you hover over it, so it requires a missing override. If we were to click on it, it has the parse route information function, which is a future function that returns the book route path. So if we were to see a future function, what we can do is we can add in the async keyword, and now we can just remove the to do and the throw unimplement error. So inside this parse route information, we are going to convert the route information in the URL into the book route path that we are going to return. So the first thing is we're going to create a variable that's called URI. So URI is a uniform resource identifier, or another word for URL, which is the uniform resource locator. So Dart has its own URI library. We are going to make use of it. So we're going to use the parse method. And what we're going to do is we're going to type in route information. And this route information is an object that we get from the URL over here. So it has a couple of properties, and we're going to get the location. So the location represents the path that we have over here. So we have the slash or the slash path or the slash path to the app or whatever, right? So we're going to make use of the location property. And now with that, we have the URI object that we can make use of. So now we're going to handle the three paths that we have created earlier in our book route path: the home path, the details path, and the unknown path. So the first path is we are going to handle the home path. So we're going to create a conditional statement saying that if the URI.path segments, so what is path segments? So what is path segments? Basically is the different segments that we have after the URL. So if we were to have book/1, so that means there is 2 path segments. If we were to have book, we only have 1 path segment. If we don't have anything, then there will be 0 path segments. So these 0 path segments will represent our home page. So if this URI path segments dot length is equal to 0, then we will return the book route path home. Alright, so we have handled the home page path. The second one will be the unknown path. So this doesn't require any conditional. So we can just return book route path dot unknown. And we can just comment and indicate saying that we are handling the unknown routes. So the last one is where we are going to handle the book ID. So since we already have this conditional, let's just copy this one and paste it over here. So if URI path segments dot length is equal to, what number do you think we need? Is it 1 or 2? If you say 2, then it's correct, because the path segments that we have over here is 2. We have the book and then we have the ID. Let's add in the curly brackets. Alright, the first thing is that we can actually check whether the first path segment is not a book. If it's not a book, then we're going to return the unknown path. So what we can do is we can just copy this if statement again, like such, and then we're going to paste it over here. So we're going to check the first path segment to see whether it is book. So if the first path segment is not equal to 2, but I would say it's not equal to the word book, then we will return the book route path dot unknown. So if the path segments is actually a book, then we can actually handle it here. So let's type in a new variable called remaining. And then we will use the URI object that we have, and then we're going to make use of the path segments. And then we are going to take in the element at the first index or the second position. So basically we want to get the ID. So we're going to parse this thing by creating an ID variable, and then we're going to make use of the integer type object using the method try parse, and we're going to pass in the remaining variable. Let's put in a semicolon. So what a try parse does is that it will parse the string over here as much as it can. So if it's unsuccessful, then it will return a null. So what we can do is we can just copy this if statement over here. So highlight everything, copy this, and then we can paste it over here. So this conditional we have already used. So what we can do is the conditional where the ID is equal to null. So if it fails, then what we can do is we can return the unknown path. So if the ID is actually an integer, then we can return the book route path dot details with the ID in it. And now we have settled the first part of the book route information parser. So once that is done, we need to override one more thing. There is this thing called restore route information. So you can type in restore route information. So what restore route information does is that it updates the browser history for your web application. So if you want to opt in or update our browsing history, we will need to override this method, which is the restore route information, and we will need to return a route information according to the path that we have. So what we can do is we can just change the word configuration over here into path, and then we will remove everything over here. Inside our book route path, we have the is home page, is details page, and the is unknown boolean, whether it's a getter method or the field inside the book route path. So we're going to make use all of these boolean values. So let's go back to main.dart file. So we can type in if bracket path dot is unknown. So if the book route path is unknown, what we are going to do is we're going to return this thing called the route information. So this route information over here represents the information that we have inside our URL here. Earlier, we actually have seen this thing called route information. And then if you were to type in location, you could see that it is only concerned of the location of the application using these slashes on our path over here. So if you were to scroll all the way up, this is the route information that we are concerned over here. So this is the location that we're going to pass in inside our web browser history. So what we are going to pass for our unknown is, you can either type unknown or you can type /404, and then you can put a semicolon. So let's duplicate it by pressing alternate shift down arrow key. And now if the path is homepage, then the location will just be a normal slash. And lastly, what is the last path that we are missing? Well, if you guessed it, is the is details page. And what we are going to return is this path, which is the book And now we want the specific ID that we need. So how do we get it? So what we can do, since the book route path inside our class has this integer ID, we can actually pass it using the string interpolation. So we're going to put the money sign with the curly brackets, and then we're going to type in path.id. And since this is out of the line over here, we can just wrap this whole return statement in a curly brackets. Now, we already have settled all of the different paths. However, this function still requires the type route information. So if none of this path is hit, then we will return a null value. So we are done with our book route path data class, and at the same time, so we also have finished our router information parser. We are left with the router delegate. Alright, so let's start creating the router delegate. So I'm going to minimize book route information parser. I'm going to create a new class, and I'm going to name it as book router delegate. And then this will extend this thing called the router delegate. So if I were to hover over the router delegate, it requires a type. So I'm going to put in the type, and we're going to put in the type book route path. Now if you were to hover over here, if you were to open up the suggestion menu in our book router delegate, it requires us to have 5 missing overrides. So the first one is add listener. Second one is build method, very familiar for our widgets. Third one is pop route. Fourth one is remove listener, and fifth one is the set new route path. So now from the article that I've read, basically we need to extend using some mixins. So for the listeners over here, I mean for the listener objects over here, or for the listener functions over here, what we can do is we can actually have a change notifier mixin. So let's command Z, and then we are going to type in the word with, and we're going to add the mixin change notifier. And now if you were to just open the suggestion menu for the book router delegate, you can see there is create 3 missing overrides. And then if you were to see the different overrides functions, the listener functions has been handled in our change notifier mixin. So now we are left with the build method, the pop route method, and the set route path. Now there is this specific mixin that actually handles the pop route for us. Well, this mixin is called, you guessed it, for some reason, it is pop navigator route delegate mixin. That is a lot. And in this pop navigator route delegate mixin, it requires the type. So what we can do is we can just copy this book route path over here in our router delegate, and then we can paste it at the pop navigator router delegate mixin. So what does this pop navigator router delegate mixin? That's a very long word. Basically, it helps wires the pop route method to the navigator it builds. So this pop route will actually be removed or not needed. So now we are left with the build and set new route path, but also there's one more missing override. And if you have guessed it for some reason, it is the navigator key. So let's move this on top. We can just copy this whole override statement, and then we can just paste it right above the build method. So this global key navigator state over here is the state of the navigator widget that we have over here. So you can think of this router delegate as some sort of a state or stateful widget. First, we need to have the navigator state. So what we can do is we can create a global navigator state. So we can just copy this whole thing, and then we can paste it over here. And now you have global key navigator state. The next thing that we are going to do is we are going to make use of this getter method, which is called current configuration. This is another method that we are going to override. So what this current configuration does is that it detects a route information which may have changed as a result of a rebuild. And then this will show the correct path in the URL, and this will help populate the browser history in order to support the forward and the backward buttons. So this is pretty important if you want to have your URL over here to be in sync with the back and forward button. So what we're going to do is we are going to convert this into a block body. We are not going to return the super or the parent current configuration, but we are going to use our own. So this current configuration will be according to the different paths that we have in our book route path. But it will require some variables that we need inside this book router delegate. So that means we need, if we were to scroll all the way up, we will need some variables from our stateful widget in our My App widget. So the first thing that we need is this book underscore selected book. This will be a good indicator if we know that we are able to showcase the book page or the home page. So make sure that you copy this book selected book and then you scroll all the way down and then just paste it right above the navigator key. Second thing is we need this boolean that is called show 404, and this is a boolean variable that will say whether we need to show a 404 page, and then we will type in false. So now we're going to make use of these two variables inside our current configuration. If the show 404 is true, we are going to return the book route path, and then this will lead to the unknown page. The next thing is we are going to have the path to our home page. So what we can do is if the selected book is equal to null, because that means none of the selected book is being chosen, then we are going to return the book route path that leads us to the home page. And then lastly, if the show 404 is false, and if the selected book is not null, that means we are clicking on one of the book covers. That means we will return the book route path that leads us to the details page. However, how are we going to get our ID? So we actually have this global variable called books, which is a list of books that you see in a web app. And then we can make use of this index of method that returns the first index of the list. So let's click on this, and the element is the selected book that we have. Alright, so now we have the current configuration that's using the variables over here. The next thing that we need to do is we are going to transfer the Navigator widget from our My App widget or the MaterialApp widget over here and insert it inside the router delegate. So what we can do is we can highlight this whole Navigator and then copy this, and let's scroll all the way down, and now we can just remove the to do and the throw, and then we can type in return and paste it as such. Now there's a lot of things that is error over here. The first thing is that our ending colon, we can just put in a semicolon. The second thing is that inside the book router delegate is using change notifier to handle the state. So there is no set state. So what we can do is we can remove the set state method, and then in order for us to update, we are going to use this notify listener. And then let's put the semicolon. And lastly, we need this handle book tabbed function. So this is found if we were to scroll all the way up inside our MaterialApp widget. So we can just copy this handle book tabbed function, and then we're going to paste it inside our book router delegate over here. Let's paste this function right below this navigator key statement. And as I said earlier, so inside the change notifier, there isn't a set state method, so we're going to remove it. And then in order for us to update, we are going to type in the notify listeners. Alright, so another thing that we need to add is that inside our on pop page, if we were to click on the back button, then you could see that the selected book is equal to null. That means our show 404 must be false. So let's type in show 404, and then let's assign it to false. Why do we assign our show into a false is because if we were to go to a 404 page, there will be a back button, and this will lead us to our home page if the did pop is successful. Now we are left with one more override method, which is the set new route path. So what this set new route path does is that, for example, if a user will type in this URL or segment path and presses enter, then what this does is basically handles the state of the router delegate. So the first thing is we are going to change this configuration word into the word path because it's easier for us to understand. Now we are going to handle the different paths accordingly. But since this is a future void method, we can type in the word async. So first, what we need to do is we're going to type in the word if, and then we're going to type in the word path, and let's see if it's unknown because we are going to handle that. So if it's an unknown path, the selected book will be null because we didn't select any book. Our show 404 will be true. So let's assign it to be true. Now the thing is, since this is a future void, it doesn't have an actual value that we need to return. But once we have handled the state, we want to end this function. What we're going to do is we're going to create an empty return statement. This means we are going to end this whole function once we are left with this show 404 true. So that's why we have this return statement. If there is no return statement, this will go on, this will go on, and the code will also still be running. Alright, so once we are done with handling the unknown path, we're going to handle the details page path. So we're going to type in the if statement, and we're going to type in path is details page. So inside this details page, we want to check whether the path ID is valid. So we're going to create another if statement and type in path.id, and we have the ID that starts from 0 over here, and then it goes all the way to 5. So if it's less than 0 or if it's negative, then we will probably have a show 404 that is true. If the path ID is negative, then we'll probably show a 404. Let's type in show 404, and then we will assign it to be true. If it's negative, we will probably have to stop this method. So at the same time, if there is, for example, the ID number 6, which means there is a 7th book, then we will also need to show 404 since we are clicking on the book or the path is in the details page. So let's put in an OR conditional, and we will type in path.id is more than books.length, and then we will -1. So if the path.id is 6 and the book's length is equal to 6 minus 1, so this means that the path ID is more than the book's length, which is 5. So this will be false if the path ID is more than 5. So it only can be 5 or less. But if the path ID is not negative and the path ID is less than 5, then we are going to set the selected book. So type in selected book. We are going to assign it to a particular book with a particular ID or the index. So now we have settled when we have clicked on a book, then the selected book will not be null anymore. It will be referred to the book that we have selected. However, if the path is not a details page, let's add in an else statement. This means the path is a home page. So what we can do is, if we want to show a home page, we will have the selected book to be assigned to a null. And since our unknown path has been handled over here, we want to make sure that the show 404 will be false. Alright, so let's save this. And that is the final thing that we need to do inside our router delegate. If you scroll all the way up, let's minimize this. And now we are going to add our book router delegate and our book route information parser inside our MaterialApp. If you were to scroll all the way up, and then you see the word MaterialApp, we are going to add the named constructor router. So the router MaterialApp requires the router delegate, but it doesn't have this parameter called home. This is home. So what we can do is that we can remove this navigator. So I'm going to minimize at the pages over here, and then I'm going to remove this home parameter with the navigator widget. And now I'm going to type in a router delegate, and this will refer to our book router delegate, and we're going to create an instance out of it. The next thing that we need, if we were to scroll all the way up, is we need the route information parser. So let's type in route information parser, and then we're going to type in book route information parser with the colons as well. So we created an instance over here. Alright, so now do you think we are left with anything else? Yes, we are left with one more thing. So inside our book router delegate, we talk about show 404 and such. We actually don't have a page to show our 404. So what we can do is we can create a very simple widget. So let's create a stateless widget, and let's call it the unknown page. So inside this unknown page, it will return a scaffold, and then the app bar will be a simple empty app bar, and the body will be a simple centered text. So let's put in the child, and let's put in a text widget that has the statement not found dash 404. Let's save this, and if we were to scroll all the way up under our navigator widget over here, also make sure inside the navigator we are going to pass in the navigator key. Type in the params key, and let's add in the navigator key as well. So right now we have our home page, and then we have our book page. So what we can do is that we can create another if statement to say show 404. Then we will have a material page with a key and add in a value key. We're going to have the word unknown key, and then we're going to type in the child parameter, which is the unknown page. So since we have two if statements over here, we're going to, so the error says expected else, so let's type in the word else as well. So now let's save this. Alright, so once everything is done, we are going to restart our debug session, and let's run it again because we have a lot of code that we added in. Alright, so let's see if it works. If we were to click, for example, on the Fight Club, okay, so you can see the URL has reflected exactly what we want. So the Fight Club is the third book, but the index will be number 2. So remember number 2. Let's go back. Alright, everything works. Now if we were to put in the book, that is number 5, which is the last book, then it will go to Dirty Harry, which is the last book. Now if I were to use this back button in our browser history, let's go and see. Alright, so it works. That means our browser history recorded down exactly what we have gone through. So you can press Command Y and you'll see the history of where we have been to inside our Flutter Web project. So let's remove the history. Let's go back. And lastly, let's see if the error handling for our 404 page works. So type in a random URL, press enter. You could see there is a not found 404 page with the back button. And if you were to go back, you could see that it went back to the home page. And then we can go back to the not found page as well. So congratulations. That is a very, very long tutorial because it takes a lot of configuration in order for us to have this URL sync inside our Flutter Web project. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you want more of this kind of video, subscribe down below and comment down on anything that you're not sure of. I'll try my best to answer. So stay safe and all the best. Bye bye.